Good evening, and this is Chasing the Facts, and I'm your host, Sam Chase. With us this evening is John Moses, who, among many other things, is co-founder of the Massachusetts Afghan Alliance, and that's primarily what we will be talking about tonight. But before we do that, John, why don't you just give us about a minute's worth of a personal snapshot just to situate the viewers, and then we'll get into the discussion from there.
Awesome, and thank you for having me, Sam. I've always wanted to come on the show, so I was glad we were able to finally work it out. But so yeah, John Moses. I lived in Chelmsford since about 2012. I've been a pretty active both parent and resident in the town. I'm part of the Chelmsford School Committee. I'm actually going on my 8th year on the school committee, about to go into my 9th year.
It does not seem possible.
Man, I'll tell you what. My daughter, the reason I ran for school committee, just really quickly, the reason I ran for school committee is I was with a bunch of friends, all people about my age, my peers, and we had moved to Chelmsford, and I'd done all this research, and we were going to live in Chelmsford, it's going to be great, and it was no full-day kindergarten. And I didn't realize till we moved here. It was
wow.
Like, yeah, so you move here, and I was like, a bunch of guys, you know, go to a Christmas party, we're talking about it, and we're all mad about it, and they're like, you should run for school committee. And then I ran, and then here we are 8 years later. But we have full-day kindergarten, and we have expanded building footprint, so I think it was the right choice to make. And my son, who was born a few years later, eventually went through the full-day kindergarten program, went through those same pods. So, but yeah, so that's how I got into the school committee, and then I'm also a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, a 3-tour guy. I did 3 tours overseas.
23 years service, folks.
Yeah. It seems, oh my God, such a long time ago, right? So I joined when I was in high school. And I resigned in 2019. So not resigned, excuse me, retired in 2019. So throughout that time, I've done that. I've been on many boards in the town, and I just like to do good work. And just in the past few years, with the fall of Afghanistan and the collapse and the evacuation, Massachusetts has been receiving Afghanistan refugees from Afghanistan in the Lowell area, the Worcester area, all over the state. About 2,500 or so Afghans have come to Massachusetts. And as a result of some of the challenges they've had, not just them, but the volunteer community, we founded Massachusetts Afghan Alliance, which has done a few events now in Chelmsford specifically, and we want to expand that footprint outward. But as John Moses, I have 2 great kids. I have, like I mentioned, Ella, who's 14 and going into high school, which is a whole thing. And then I have...
Now I'm feeling old.
And then my son is going into 5th grade. So we've kind of moved out of the elementary, and we're moving our way up. So.
That's great. So, John, before we get into the specifics of what you've done with the Afghan Alliance, why don't you situate for us a little bit your time in Afghanistan? Give us a little bit of a snapshot and perspective on what that was all about, and then, of course, that leads up to the current discussion that we're going to have. So go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and again, you know, one thing I like to point out is a lot of people made the sacrifice. You know, a lot of people have deployed and they've gone overseas, they've gone to Afghanistan, they've gone to Iraq. And so these stories, you know, they're not unique. So that was my 3rd tour, actually. So the tour I went to Afghanistan was my 3rd tour. I was living in Draycott at the time, and I remember going over and getting selected by my battalion, by my commander, and officers to be selected for the embassy. So I went to the United States Embassy in Kabul, which is a really unique opportunity to learn about the Afghan culture, because most of the people that work on embassies they live in the country in which they work. And besides that, I had a lot of opportunity to go out into the world to meet with Afghan people, meet with Afghan officials. And then I ended up when I came home, I stayed in for a few more years up until retirement, ended up going to European Command, which does a lot of global NATO type work. But then, like I mentioned, I retired in 2019, which I thought was going to be the end of my service, and then Afghanistan collapsed, and it kind of changed the dynamic of what I thought the past looked like at that point.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So from that, using that as a jumping off point, now we get to the point where you're back here, you've had the experience in Afghanistan, and you realize that as a result of things unfolding perhaps not in the best way that they could have, there is now a need. So let's pick it up from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we talk about immigration, one thing I like to say about asylees is I don't think people realize that most people don't leave home unless their head is in the mouth of a shark, right? People don't leave unless there's danger. People don't want to leave their house.
Change is difficult.
Change is difficult. Change is nearly impossible. Overcoming inertia like that is really hard. But when something happens that does, and that floodgate releases, and particularly in Afghanistan where we went through this nation building exercise. We went through a 20-something year nation building exercise, longest war in the books.
Right.
Did so much damage, and the way we left was not awesome, right? It wasn't great. And I think at the end of it, how it affected everybody was essentially all these veterans had come out of the woodwork, and when everything collapsed, we found that our duty hadn't been completed. So, but yeah, that really affected the community pretty heavily. So when they eventually get to the United States, though, the challenge isn't over, right? So a lot of these people were removed. This big event happens. All these people end up in the United States, and people sometimes think of asylees as dangerous or not part of the community. And these people just show up and they want to work and they want to take care of their families. And the challenges we saw were, how do you get good information to the Afghan community? There's only 500 or so Afghans around Lowell. So all these volunteer communities that don't know anything about Afghanistan. So think about that. You have, somebody in a church is like, oh my gosh, I'm working with an Afghan family. I don't know anything about Afghanistan. The resettlement system, while generous, has gaps, which are usually filled by volunteers. That's one of the things Mass Afghan wants to figure out, is how do you make the volunteer community, how do you give it logistics, and how do you give it some structure to make it so we don't lose volunteers so often. A lot of the volunteer efforts are led by veterans, and I would love to see more veterans in Chelmsford or Lowell, Afghanistan veterans that are willing to come out and help. But at the end of the day, these are human beings. They've been relocated. They've gone through traumatic events. And I don't mind taking on that kind of mantle of like, hey, I'm an Afghanistan veteran. I love the Afghan people. We're going to build Mass Afghan to help that. And we co-founded it with a really brilliant woman, Farishta Shams, who's an Afghan immigrant that came in 2019.
So anyway, that's I just find the whole thing incredible, and the fact that you, again, somebody who has served in Afghanistan 3 tours, you obviously know the people very well. You understand the culture, and these folks are looking for, the refugees are looking basically to create a new life here in this country. So can you describe a little bit about how you view the assimilation process? Now, I would assume most of them don't speak English. Is that a good assumption to make?
It can be. It depends.
Okay.
I think there's a range. That's one of the things that's kind of interesting too. Is a lot of people that come here are college educated, and they had some kind. A lot of them have had.
So they've had some. Yes. Right.
You have a range, right? So I think the thing, you have. Think about any cross section of the United States, right? You have everything from a guy that works in the building, or all the way up to like the CEO, and every single doctors. We had doctors come out that ended up working in, I think mentioned cardboard factories one time. They had, but they come out. So you have everything from somebody who can't read all the way up to a doctor, and those different skill levels. But the assimilation portion is when they show up. So they do have, they'll have trouble with language and things like that. We have tools for that. The biggest thing is really is more emotional and comfort. How do you make somebody feel seen? So when somebody lands here and you're trying to assimilate, the first thing is you're going to land in an apartment. You may not like the apartment. You're not going to have a car, and you're not going to have a lot of ability to do things on your own because you're going to be relying on a resettlement agency or a team of volunteers. So imagine somebody that in Afghanistan was a doctor, went to medical school, did this thing, ran a practice, and comes home and they're like, I need a ride to go get groceries, right? So people are really just trying to work their way back to dignity. They're not lazy. They come out, they work really hard, and what they're trying to get to is a place where they're independent and no longer need the volunteers, where now it's just a friendship. I'm
glad you said that, because, and just to depart for one minute about the Afghan situation, I think you can say the same thing about most people that are trying to get into the country. Certainly, people should be vetted, and I understand that, and certainly people come through the southern border that probably shouldn't, and we need to acknowledge that. But my perception is that 95% of the folks coming in through whatever avenue, most of them want what you just expressed. They want a better life.
They want a better life.
They want to work, they want to be productive, and they want to do what they can to assimilate into society. So I think that is a point that is well worth making, okay? Because we don't often hear that discussion going on at the national level.
It's true, and I think I think people don't realize. And sometimes you'll see these comments about. I think there were comments about the Apollo Drive when they wanted to put the courthouses there now, right? And it was. there was a
Yes.
there was a very loud discussion about the courthouse, and there was going to be crime and and all these things, right? So I've gone to that courthouse like 5 times. There's never anybody outside. There's no crime, and it's typically because immigrants, if they commit a crime, they get immediately deported.
Exactly.
And they are absolutely terrified of committing crimes.
Exactly.
And it's one of the quietest places ever. So, in bulk, in general, I found that these different communities. Really, like you said, they want to build a life. They want to have kids. They want the kids to have educational opportunities. Every single Afghan, they've really sent their best, and I say this a lot to people. They've sent, a lot of the kids that have shown up, the ones that are, we have kids in our high school, in Chelmsford High School, they're already talking about college. Could you imagine there's nothing like an American college in Afghanistan. Right. So we have these 2 kids that are really working hard, and they're like, I want to go to college. What an unbelievable opportunity. I mean, it was hard to get here, and they're still really struggling. Like, it's not like they're completely stable, but they have these opportunities they can work through, and they do it.
Do the women have a better opportunity here than they would in Afghanistan?
Yeah, right now, so I still have families that are connected to Afghanistan, both reunification families. We have families that were split up all across the country, really. And then we have just families that I know in Afghanistan. But the women, typically, if there is a girl over 13 years old, most people won't let them out of the home. They don't go to school. Taliban will arrest people that are in schools, and we hear stories about these directly.
Are they able to get a rudimentary education?
Some.
Read, write, that kind of thing?
If the parents have means, they'll usually, if they have computer access, there's like online courses. There's actually some NGOs that do, some non-government organizations that do some really brilliant, I don't know them off the top of my head, but they do brilliant work with online education. And I remember seeing a presentation, one of these groups, in their first class, they had like 4 girls, and they're all black screens. It's like Zoom, right? And you can't see their faces. And they said by the last course, they had like hundreds of Afghan girls like logging in and doing education. Because when they get here, and then I'll give you the analog, the ones that arrive here, all immediately like, where do I go to college? And not just bachelor degrees. I'm talking like master's degrees, doctorates. And Afghan women are just amazing. I think they understood what they got by landing here, what they received, like the opportunity in front of them. And it's been just amazing. It's been really amazing to watch.
Well, it's very gratifying to me when I see immigrants coming in and embracing most aspects of our culture, because again, they're here because they're trying to get away from a bad situation, and they're just very grateful and appreciative. And John and I were talking off camera just before the show went on, and John obviously has had a lot of experience dealing in other cultures. I've had some experience in that area myself, and it always strikes me that the people who complain the loudest in this country are people that don't have any experience beyond the borders of this country.
Yeah.
And I think it would be really good if everybody could get out of the country. And I say to people, don't go to a tough place like Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Go live in a European country.
Yeah.
Okay? For contrast. And then, you'll see what we have here in this country. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. A lot of things are broken, a lot of things need fixing, but what we have in this country, generally speaking, to me,
Is unique. Yeah.
is unique because it is the opportunity that we have.
Right.
And people, if they do what they're supposed to do and follow the law, generally they've got unlimited potential and opportunity. That doesn't exist in most other countries.
I agree, absolutely. Right. And I love that.
I'll get off my soapbox now, John. Go ahead.
No, this is your soapbox. Yeah. I think one thing that has really stuck with me a lot is kind of you mentioned the struggle earlier. The struggle of immigration is timeless, is one of the things that I've learned. One of the things that I have found most interesting about the work, and I want to talk more locally, is that I end up in Lowell a lot. And I end up in my old neighborhood where my grandparents grew up. And so I remember living in like these triple-decker type houses and like these older houses in Lowell. And I remember like the communities, the Spanish communities, the Cambodian communities, and all these other communities. And now that I'm doing work with Afghans, they're landing in the same places. Exactly. It's like history just repeats itself.
Absolutely right.
It's the same apartments, and we go in and we clean them and we try to make it the best we can. But the real insight that I'm able to provide back is it's not always going to be like this. Like this, I started in the same place. Like this is the same place. My grandparents emigrated from Canada. They were French Canadian. They went through Maine, came down to Lowell. They lived in this terrible apartments and eventually worked their way out. My grandfather,
and that's the cycle.
And that's the cycle. Yeah. My grandfather, who couldn't read, we ended up having grandkids that had college degrees and owned houses and did, good things in the military, and all my cousins, right? And they have those opportunities now. And so it's really hard. I don't feel great when they end up in a bad apartment and they know they're not going to have a license and they know they're going to struggle with the language. But I also know that long after I'm gone, the seeds we plant will be American seeds, and there'll be citizens and generations of citizens that we've done the right thing for.
And those folks that come here and they get assimilated, I'm going to say, wild guess, and say that probably a large percentage of them feel that they need to continue that work. They need to give back, so to speak, and they will themselves help the next wave of folks that come in. Is that an accurate statement? Yeah,
one of the things Mass Afghan is doing, so outside of the fact that, a lot of our advisory board is Afghan, but we're actually looking for, and Farisha is part of the leadership, but we're actually starting to look for leaders within the community, within the Afghan community to step up. But I do find that they're compassionate, and one of I'm going to actually meet with the Cambodian Massachusetts Assistance Association. Interestingly enough, Cambodians have a very similar history, right? The Cambodians, bad U.S. policy,
horrible
into the US,
situation that they came from.
Right.
Absolutely right.
And so this history keeps repeating itself. And I forget why I brought them up, but I'm going to meet with them. And one of the things I want to talk to them about is I feel like, there's only like 500 Afghans, but we all have these communities that grow out of, oh my gosh, everything went bad for the Cambodians, so people came out, they build these associations and organizations to help them, but they're still here, right? And they're still here now they help all kinds of refugees. So their mission even expanded beyond that. So I think
and they've been very successful. We have politicians in Lowell of Cambodian extraction. So yes, it's amazing what can be done.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think, I think one of the really great things is they can be empathetic too. I mentioned reunification cases. I actually went back in history, and it's not a surprise the Cambodian people also dealt with separation. So the breadwinner had to leave Cambodia to go out and then leave his family behind and then pull them back in later. What a decision to have to make. I mean, imagine making a decision to walk away from your wife and your kids and be like, maybe I'll see you in 5 years, maybe not. And this is before the internet. So.
Well, I think deep within us is always the notion that you do what you have to do.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that's what's governing that situation.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I don't think anybody is making a bad choice there. I think they're making the choice they have to make.
Exactly.
I am very forgiving of people that have to make choices during the evacuation and all that. People had to make really hard choices. Well,
again, you've seen it, and people that have that kind of broadening experience understand there. But for the grace of God, go I. I mean, here we are. I'm born and raised here in the United States and have had the privilege of that situation. I am very grateful that I've had some broadening experience so that I can put it into context, but a lot of people haven't, and it's too easy to dismiss these problems, okay? And that's why I really, hats off to you and folks like you that jump in and try to make the situation better. Now, you have a colleague on the school committee, Maria Santos, who's an immigration attorney. Have you had conversations with her? Because there is a wealth of information.
Oh, yeah. So Maria and I are good friends. So we've been friends since we were on the school committee together. And actually, before I even continue, Maria Santos has done so much work on not just behalf of Afghans, for all kinds of immigrants, but specifically to my work. After the evacuation, I was like, she's the only immigration attorney I know, and I love Maria Santos. Maria Santos has helped several families. She's helped me file paperwork. She's done pro bono work. People don't realize that.
I am not surprised to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you that, but I told you. So
that's okay.
But she does this pro bono work, and I don't think people realize when you're doing like a family of 6, an asylum application, aside from all the little tricks to make sure it gets through the process, how many dozens and dozens and dozens of free hours you have to give out for a pro bono case or something like that, or even advice where you're taking an hour-long meeting. And she gives it selflessly and has never asked. Her mom, also a lovely person, donated a car to an Afghan family. She had an old car, wasn't driving. It's a beautiful car. It's an Acura, like 60,000 miles. and that, you know,
An Acura.
An Acura, no joke, 60,000-mile Acura.
See, now you're talking to a car guy. You got my interest.
Yeah. So, but you got a reliable car out of
Right.
it. Need a little bit of work, but like at the end of it, Maria Santos is phenomenal. Susan McKinnon, she drives refugees around. She does a lot of rides for kids. And I'm
not
sure,
surprised to hear that either.
Yeah, we have in this town, in the town of Chelmsford, outside of Mass Afghan, we really have an incredible group of not just school committee members. We have incredible town people. We have people that are interested. We have people that give back. I actually would put Chelmsford against any other town around here.
I'm glad you brought it up yourself because I was going to ask that question, and you've answered it. And having lived in this town now for 45 years, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, that is essentially the fabric of the town and the mentality of the townspeople. I mean, you know, we're 36,000 people, folks. You're always going to get a few clunkers in there, but on the, anywhere. I don't care where you go. But by and large, the town has a big heart.
Yeah.
And now, do you interact at all with the town administration in any way?
Just as a citizen, just a resident.
Okay.
Yeah. So I do my yearly. I get my tax thing for being. But no, I generally I'm a user of the services of the town. So the town administration, we deal. You talking about like through the school committee or just generally?
Well, in regard to your work
to Mass
here,
Afghan.
yes.
No, not yet actually. So when you're building an organization, which is something I've learned over the last year or so, we got to kind of start with the biggest target first. So the first thing we're doing is we're doing the stuff on the kind of the bigger level, and then we're going to be actually doing a town by town work. Starting Chelmsford's always going to be the first place we start, but we're actually going to be going to each town within our kind of operating range and talking to each town and figuring out what they do for, you know, to pull all that information together. So Chelmsford's included in that. So. That's just a little further down the road, but yeah, I mean, I know everybody in the administration building. There's great people over there too. I mean, it's just it's a good group of people. I think that are willing to work with you.
Absolutely, and these are the kinds of efforts that, you know, should they need to support it, they would.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no doubt in my mind. So take a minute and explain to us how your organization functions, the organizational structure. You know.
Yeah.
Do you have you do have a title, but is co-founder, but from an operational standpoint, what happens?
So that's a great question. So I'm actually the CEO and president. I find those terms a little bit they're a little bit too big. But
I like it though.
I like co-founder. It's a simple. I like co-founder. I think co-founder spreads it out a little bit better. But I'm CEO, president of Mass Afghan. We're right now just an LLC. We're waiting on our 501 certification, which takes a little bit of time. So
yes,
we can't.
It does.
We can't. We're about month 4 or 5 though, so we're really close. And so we don't take donations right now. So everything we're doing is kind of just that. But it's so CEO, president, and then next to me is Frishta. She's doing all the people programs. I'm handling all the operations. We're doing some AI projects, some things like that. So I'm handling a lot of the technology. Day-to-day logistics. And then on the other side, Frisch is going to be handling a lot of the people programs, like how do we get out into communities, how do we bring Afghans out and into to their community. And then Jason Chandonnet is our CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and he's actually heading up all of the AI product stuff that we're doing. So we're trying to find a way to improve information for like volunteers and groups through a really kind of like a really contextual AI app, but it's a more long-term thing. How do we get all this big federal, state, local data into a place that Sam Chase, who's a volunteer at a church, can get to it without having to have a law degree?
Now, do you have offices in town here?
We do not yet.
Okay, so
It's on the map.
It's on the map.
It is on the map. We are looking at so we have a couple programs. One of the programs we're evaluating will involve property. Will involve really warehousing. A little bit of warehousing. We want to do. We're looking to do in volunteer supply chain. So essentially, there's a lot of things that go into setting up apartments and cleaning apartments and getting people ready, and and a lot of that is done kind of hodgepodge through either through donations or bunch of different vehicles, but it's always very inconsistent. So what we want to do is make that more consistent. So you come in, we're going to clean a house. We have a vehicle maybe you could take, but we have a vision of having property, and it will be in Chelmsford. I wouldn't actually look out. This is a Chelmsford organization. It represents the town as much. I want to make sure I represent the town well. So I'm going to make sure the headquarters is in Chelmsford.
So and once all that machinery is firmly established, okay, and you have your offices or however you choose to operate.
Yeah.
And you indicated just a minute ago that your hope would be to expand the scope and the vision beyond Chelmsford and I don't think you're going to have much difficulty doing that and attracting the attention that you need, the positive attention you need, and getting the volunteer horsepower that you're going to need to do that. Because we have Afghan veterans everywhere in the state, obviously, and if we can broaden that scope to include other towns and cities and towns, that's going to provide much more opportunity for the people that you resettle.
Yeah, and I think in our position will be we're essentially not eyeballing. Our territory is going to be the 3rd congressional district. So essentially, we've done a lot of work with Representative Trahan's office. We've done work with International Institute of New England. They're all very tight in CMMA. We're going to try to work with a couple other organizations. So there's actually a really rich support structure here. And what we do what we're really looking at is year 5. We're a couple of years through Afghanistan. At year 5, where are we going to be when people fall off the resettlement map too? So we're trying to catch everybody in between. But we think we have the right partnerships, we have the right relationships, and I think we can get volunteers. One of the problems that we're really trying to solve is volunteers. The burnout's high. It's just a lot of work. Some of the work is traumatic. Sometimes you work with a refugee family that didn't have a good experience. A lot of people, when they're desperate, will share. Right? They'll share. Look what happened to my friend. Look what happened to my cousin. Like, I'm going to die, and not everybody's prepared for that. Not everybody's had that experience.
You had a story. Full disclosure, I've talked to John before on this issue, or I should say I've listened to John, because he's the expert here, and it's a great learning experience for anybody that wants to engage in this kind of a conversation. But you told a story on one of the other programs about your friend, Afghan. I think he was your interpreter?
Yeah, Masood, yeah.
So we've got about 3 minutes to go here, so just talk a little bit about that.
So Masood was there. He was actually in Afghanistan with me. So Masood was a good friend of mine. Masood sat right next to me in my office, and I had this interesting job where I was on the road a lot. I would leave, even though I was on the embassy, which was amazing, right, for a soldier to be on the embassy. It was also a lot of like, hey, you go out by yourself. I wore civilian clothes a lot. And I also had another interpreter. But essentially, we go out. We have this great mission together. I go home in 2012, relive my life. Masood ends up, finding his way to the United States with our help. We do his SIV, which is his immigrant visa process, and do all this work. He gets here, becomes a citizen. 2021 happens, and I get a text that, on the 16th of August, which was the day after the evacuation really started to kick off. And it was one text, and I actually have a picture of it somewhere, but it essentially says, "Bro, can you help me? My brother's in Afghanistan." And I just was like, absolutely. Like, what do you need? Like, da-da-da-da-da. And that was how it started. And obviously, I didn't think it was going to be that hard. I didn't understand the consequence of what was about to happen, or the freight train that was running down.
So it's his fault, right?
Yeah, I kicked it off. Poor Masood. And just to frame that conversation up, because we don't have a lot of time.
Nope.
That story was not a success. So Masood, one of my best friend, his family.
Well, you learn from your failures, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, those failures had consequences. 3 other families, we tried to get through into the airport to get on a plane to get out. And numerous things happened that didn't allow that. But at the end of it, those 4 families didn't get out of Afghanistan.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
We got, our team got 68 people out. I was really proud of that work. So.
As well you should be.
Thank you.
Okay, I mean, there are those of us who look at this and we say, well, you're really doing God's work. Now, in terms of your time commitment, I mean, you have a family to support, and you have to live your life and so forth. How do you manage to?
I do a lot of work from home. I have a lot of energy. I'm not afraid to drive places. I just do it. I don't know. People ask me that a lot. They're like, how do you do all this stuff? And I'm like, I just keep doing it. You just keep going. You just find the next thing. I am fortunate, though. My wife, my family support me really well. I work from home. I'm an executive at a data company that has been, we're pretty well established, and I automate parts of my job now, so I'm able, and the company, my partners support me in this. So
well, there you go.
That's
key. That is key.
So they don't mind if I'm like, I'll see you tomorrow. I gotta go help move an apartment.
Yeah, as long as you get your work done.
As long as you get your work done.
That's
which is how we treat our employees too.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I wish more companies had that same perspective.
So that helps a lot. And the support of the town.
And the support of the town. So 30 seconds, how can people help you?
I would just really love to see people really think about the refugee community, understand that they're in the town around us. They're not just in Chelmsford, they're in Westford, they're in Lowell, they're in Harvard, they're in all these different places, and they just want to be seen and be part of the community and Afghans are really loving, great people. And if you're an Afghanistan veteran, check out massafghanalliance.org, and you can sign up as a volunteer, and we can start reaching out to people. We're going to start that program pretty soon. So.
Very good. And we are out of time. John, thank you very much. We'll have you back.